Now this is just the start. I'm creating a custom panel here, and I want my user, or whoever's using this overlap stack panel, to be able to specify the width, specify the rotation, the distance from the top. I want to be able to modify those without having to go to Visual Studio each time and change the values in the Arrange override. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create my custom dependency properties. Now we talked about dependency properties a little bit earlier. What is a dependency property? In case you've forgotten, a dependency property is any property that you can see the value of here in the Property Inspector in Blend. So with my overlap stack panel selected, when I switch over to my properties list, all of these properties, the background, the visibility, the margin, these are all dependency properties. I'm going to actually create my own dependency properties and get them to get added to the list over here on the right. Let me switch back over to Visual Studio, and I'm going to add a little more code here. This code has to be fairly specific in what it is, and this is another piece of code that you'll find in your gems folder because you need to get this one right. I'm going to move up to the top of my class, and I'm going to add the registration for the dependency property. Let's take a look at what those pieces actually mean. The public static read-only dependency property, the first piece just says that I'm creating a dependency property. The overlap property is the property that I want to create. Now you notice I called it overlap, and I need to use that exact same string later on when I register. Also, dependency properties must have the word property at the end. It's an explicit command that the .NET Framework and Blend both recognize, so it'll display correctly over in the Property Inspector. The next piece is we need to register the dependency property. The first argument is the name of the property, in this case, overlap. Again, this needs to match the first part of the dependency property. The second argument is type of double. This is saying that my property is a double. That means a floating point number. The next argument is what is the parent. In this case, I'm saying the type of overlap stack panel. So this dependency property is going to be associated with an overlap stack panel. If I specify this, say, on type of grid, the grid and all of its children would now have this custom property, but I want to make sure that it only goes at the overlap stack panel and any children. Finally, I'm specifying some property metadata. This is just a fancy way of saying what do I want my value to start with, in this case double.nan, and what are the metadata options. I'm saying that this particular property affects how the element arranges. Now there's a lot of pieces here, but realistically the only things that you're going to change when you're working with this is to modify what is the parent and what is the name of the property. In fact, when I create my second dependency property, I'm going to use this exact same line, but just change a couple quick values. Now that I've registered my dependency property, I need to give the user a way to access it. I do this with a field. Now this looks like something that should be a little more familiar. We saw this same structure before. I'm saying that I'm creating a field called overlap of type double, and this is the code that I want to run anytime we get the value, and below it is the code we want to run every time we set the value. So first I'm going to get, and on a get I'm going to return as a double this .get value overlap stack panel overlap property. Now this looks similar to when we got the data context off the grid way back in lesson 1. The format and the syntax are the same. I'm just getting my own dependency property instead of the dependency property that's already been established. Now I need to set the value as well. That just does a this.setValue instead of getValue. It asks what the dependency property is. Well, that's the overlap stack panel dot overlap property. And what value? Well, I'll just use value. Whenever the setter of a field is called, value contains the value that we're going to set it to. Now I'm going to hit Control S to save, and I'm going to build and make sure that I got everything correct. Now let's switch back over to Blend, and I'm going to rebuild everything. I'm going to use my selection tool, and I'm going to scroll down to the bottom of the property inspector. In the miscellaneous category, when I scroll down, you'll find that overlap is now specified. So all of those processes that I went through now creates a property that I can set in my property inspector. Now it's defaulting to NaN, or not a number. Why is that? Well, to get the effects arrange metadata option to work correctly, I needed to supply $.NaN here. I can change that in the constructor of my overlap stack panel. So let me switch back over to that, roll down to the bottom of my text, and let's create a constructor. I'm going to go outside of my existing methods and do a public overlap stack panel. Now normally when I've done methods, I've had to specify either public or protected or private, and then what type is being returned. For a constructor, you don't need to specify the type that's being returned, you just need to make sure that the method name matched whatever your class is. So here, overlap stack panel matches the name of my class. The .NET Framework will recognize this as a constructor. That means the code inside this will be run as soon as the object is instantiated. So here, I'm just going to say this.overlap equals 0. Save this, switch back over to Blend and build, and now my overlap here is showing not a number again. The reason is because this object was already instantiated, its value didn't get updated in the constructor. So I'm going to take this overlap stack panel and delete it. I'm going to go into my assets again, select my overlap stack panel, and drag a new one out. Now you can see that the overlap property is in fact set to 0, since that's what the overlap is supposed to get when it first starts up. Now let's see what it actually does. Let's select my overlap stack panel and drop a couple rectangles in it. Now since my overlap is set to 0, I expect my rectangles to be displayed right on top of each other since the overlap has no space between them. Now as I drag my rectangles out though, they're getting spaced 20 pixels apart. That's because although I've created the dependency property, I haven't specified in the method how to use that property. That's the next thing we're going to do.